Welcome everybody. This is Jason and this week's workshop is SimPE, a Beginner's Guide Part 2. In this workshop we're looking specifically at object-related resources. So let's jump right in. What is the CTSS? The CTSS is a catalog description. This is a specialized text resource. The STR resource is just a list of text entries, but the CTSS is a specialized type of STR that only has two entries. The one, it's the title of an object in your catalog, and the second one, the second line is the description of the item in your catalog. The plugin is very straightforward. The first line allows you to edit the title, and the second allows you to edit the description. The CTSS is not part of the scene graph, but it is an important resource if you're a brand new object creator. The OBJD. The OBJD's plugin can best be described as an organized list. The left section contains the GID, that's globally unique identity, and it communicates with other GIDs in the case of diagonal windows or diagonal doors. This is where you align the straight object with the diagonal object. So if you look to the right 2/3 of the plugin on the OBJD, you have two tabs. You have catalog sort. This is the flags. So if you flag it as, for example, living room, kitchen, dining room, and you open the by mode catalog, it will appear in those categories in game. The second tab, the raw data in the OBJD, this is sort of like, it's an organized list, but it will have a header, and then if you're not looking at that section, for example, you can collapse it. For example, catalog price. You want to edit the catalog price. By default, it is expanded, but if we need to move past this, if we need to find, say, section 6, we can collapse that just by clicking on that little minus sign. And the important sections of raw data, we've got catalog price, catalog sorting. This sort of does what the catalog sort flags do, but if you want to edit it as text instead of checking the checkboxes, you can do it in catalog sorting. Catalog ratings. So for example, if you see, say, a weight bench and it will say plus body, that is controlled by the catalog ratings. User placement. This will tell you in the catalog this object must be against the wall, or this object must be outside. These are flags within the catalog, but in order to edit the actual placement, you would need to mess with the behaves, which is a whole different thing. It's just nice to know that it's here when you're looking at the OBJD. Mesh and graphics. This is important if you want to edit the green footprint for multi-tile objects. Resource cross-references. This is important if you work with slots and T-tabs. Probably not as important to new object creators, but it's good to know that it's there. And basically, the OBJD does a whole bunch of cool stuff. It's not directly a part of the scene graph, but we will have a look at that later. The GMDC. This is where your mesh goes. The GMDC is Geometric Data Container, and it just holds all of the different parts of your mesh. What is a mesh? It's essentially, if you ever made like paper mache in elementary school, this is the wireframe part that you stretch the texture over. So this is the 3D object part of your package file. It holds the 3D object. The GMDC's plugin is kind of unique. If you look at the left side of the plugin, you will see all of the parts, sort of like in this previous slide where all of the different bottles and then the wood are different subsets of the mesh. The bottom left, it has a list of the mesh parts. The middle portion, this will show you what your 3D object currently looks like. And the right portion, if you're working with a jointed object like a cabinet or a bar stool, this will show you the joint hierarchy, the skeleton, and then the vertices that are linked to the object skeleton. One of the other significant tabs of the GMDC is the groups tab. It's organized as a list, but here you can delete groups, you can rename groups. You don't have to go back to the main tab and re-import them. You can do a lot of the editing from the groups tab. And then the model tab, this is important if you're a beginning object creator, because this is where you would rebuild the bounding box from. If you've seen an object that doesn't have the bounding box made correctly, you place it, you drop it down, and then you can't grab it with the hand tool or the design tool because the point that you select from, it hasn't been specified in the bounding box. They haven't added that part of the mesh to it. Because the GMDC is a visual representation of how the object is put together, it is an important part of the scene graph. The TXTR, this is the texture image. This is a 2D image that gets applied over the mesh. The TXTR's plugin is fairly straightforward. The left 1/3 holds the file name, the DXT format, which is important if you work with like transparencies. And then the right 2/3 holds the actual image. That's the texture. The TXTR is one of the primary resources that new creators will be using. For example, if you're doing a recolor, you would work probably just with the TXTR. You wouldn't mess with the other two resources in the recolor. So it is important for new creators to be familiar with it. The TXMT. TXMT is the material definition. This is the part that says, okay, here's my texture. How do I apply it to the GMDC? Is it shiny? Is it backlit? Is it semi-transparent? This is the TXMT's job. The TXMT's plugin looks similar to the GMDC or the Crest. It's built in kind of a block structure. The default tab is content. This is going to be the named properties. You can add or remove properties. You can rename properties. This is where you would edit them. The C material definition subtab in content. This is going to be the one, for example, if you're building an accessory and it doesn't apply correctly, you could change it from standard material to sim standard material. The file list tab, this is where you would name your texture. And if you're using, say, an environment cube to make it shiny, this is where you would add the environment cube. Then categorize properties, it has a similar function to the properties tab, but here, for example, the environment cube coefficient here, you can see that it's turned completely off, but you could edit the RGB values and make the environment cube shinier. And you can edit the specularity coefficient and the diffuse coefficient and all of those the same way. Within the scene graph hierarchy, the TXMT falls between the TXTR and the SHPE. So basically it's communicating between those two resources. Like, okay, here's the texture. How do I apply it to the object? And while it's not strictly necessary for new creators, you might need it. For example, okay, this texture is way too shiny. And I've already edited the TXTR, so how can I fix that? You might need to be familiar with the TXMT. Other important resources. These are just general resources that it's good to be familiar with as a new creator, but they're not something that you would probably use right away. The MMAT, this is material override. This is at the top of the food chain. This is the top resource for anything. Basically, it's saying the TXMT that is linked to this, I want it to be changeable. This needs to be designable. We need to be able to swap this one out. This one, it communicates between the GMND and the TXMT. Then we have the Crest. This is in order of prominence. This is right below the MMAT. It's the brain. It's the nerve center. It has, for example, all of the light nodes. It has all of the slot nodes. It has the object footprint. This is basically if you plop an object down in game and the game immediately crashes, it's probably because the crest is broken. So the crest is a very important resource. The SHPE. And again, as a brand new creator, you probably won't mess with it much, but it's part of the scene graph hierarchy. And I call it the party coordinator. Basically, it communicates between the GMND, which then talks to the GMDC, and the TXMT, which then talks to the TXTR. So it puts all of those resources together. The GMND. This identifies, it does a couple of cool things. If you're making a repositoried or slaved object, it identifies where the parent crest is, and it lets you name your recolorable subsets. It's like, okay, I need wood and base to be recolorable, and you would name those in the C design mode enable block. Starting with the non-scene graph resources, we have the CTSS. And as I was showing the presentation, this is basically a string. It's like the STR resources, but it's specialized in that there are only 2 lines of text, and each line has a specific function. So this is the title of the text, of the object in the catalog, and this is the object description. And then we'll move on to the OBJD. And this has kind of a unique plugin here. This is our GUID. This is going to tell the catalog, hey, I am a unique thing. Don't override one of the default Maxis objects. Create a new object or a new catalog entry for me. And again, if you're linking straight and diagonal windows, you can do that here. If you're cloning a new object and you want it to be recolorable, you would use this update mmats here to update this GID value to all of the current mmats. So if you look at catalog sort, that's this tab here. We can select what rooms, the room sort that we want the object to be in, and we can select the function sort. Then we have the raw data tab. And what's cool about these, you can switch this to decimal value if you don't read hexadecimal. And this will be the actual decimal value of the object in the catalog. So it appears in, should be general party. That's how I had it before. So then we don't really use that a lot, but here we can change the catalog price manually. Here we can change the catalog sort by editing the data here. User placement, it will tell you if it needs, it will change the flags. It won't change the actual placement. But for example, if it needs to be against the wall, you could tell it that it needs to be against the wall by editing the flags here. Meshes and graphics. So if you have a multi-tile object, it would tell it, okay, this is, by changing or multi-tile master ID to -1, it would tell it, this is the master tile for this object. This is the tile that all of the other tiles are coordinated to. You can change the direction that the object faces by editing front direction. Then cross references, this does, it coordinates with the T tab, and it coordinates with the slots. And those are the important parts of that. There are a couple of other things that are good to know, but we won't mess with those that much. And those are the 2 non-scene graph resources. There are more, but that as a new object creator should be aware of. So what exactly is a scene graph? So if you go here, Tools, Object Tools, Scene Grapher, this is like a little roadmap. This tells you which resources are connected to which other resources. For example, if an object isn't displaying a texture, you could open your scene graph to figure out where it's not connecting correctly. So we can see this highest level resource is the MMAT. This basically it tells you, okay, this TXTR here can be overridden, so you can change this TXTR with the design tool. This is telling you TXMT. The TXMT can be changed with the design tool. This is telling you which materials can be overridden, and it's connected directly to the crest, as are all of the rest of these. The crest, this is where any slot nodes are, like the routing slots and the container slots on a table. This is actually a table. The crest talks to the shape. The shape, then it coordinates with both the GMND and the TXMT. So it's putting these two together. The GMND, this tells you which resets are colorable and all of that, which are recolorable and all of that. And the GMND communicates with the GMDC. And then this is the TXMT. This is your material, and it talks to the TXTR. Okay, so we have the scene grapher. This is the general visualization of how the object is put together. Okay, so now let's look at the GMDC. So here we have just a regular old bar, or I'm sorry, just a regular old table. This is a table, I keep forgetting. Okay, we click the preview button and we can see what the mesh actually looks like here. Now, if you have a jointed mesh, from this same set, I have a bar stool somewhere. That's empty. So, if you have a mesh that has actual joints, on the right side here, you will see the joint hierarchy. We can see which vertices are assigned to which joints. Okay, so that's the GMDC. Then, the other resource that's super important for new creators is the TXTR. It actually holds the texture. And if we look here, we've got the DXT format. For example, if you wanted to make the texture alpha editable or semi-transparent, you could change the DXT format. You can, if you right click on the texture part of the TXTR, you have the different menus. You can just straight import the texture, or you can build DXT. And that's the texture. And then you have the TXMT. So if we just look at one of these, in the Properties tab, we have the texture. We have all of the names of the different properties. You can add properties here. You can delete existing properties. And then if you wanted to enable an environment cube, you would go over to the file list here, and in addition to the texture, you would add the default Maxis environment cube name or your own custom environment cube name if that's how you want to roll. And then if you look at this first sub-tab, for example, if this were an accessory, a standard material, it wouldn't fly. you would need to edit this to be sim standard material. And then this tab controls how shiny everything is. So this is the environment cube coefficient. We've got the diffuse coefficient, that's the actual texture. We have emissive, which is kind of like an inner glow. If you're working with glass, this can do a lot of cool things. And specularity. This is, if it doesn't have an environment cube, specularity controls how shiny it is. And then we've got the shape. Not a whole lot to see here, but basically shape, it tells you what, okay, here's the subset of the GMDC, and here's the material that we're linking it to. So by default, it's going to be this material, and then whatever MMAT, whatever material override you have, then you will be able to design the object. And then we have the GMND. This does a few things, but primarily, I guess, for a new object creator, what's important is this block here, TS design mode enabled. This tells you which subsets are recolorable. Like for this object, there's only one subset, but it's telling you, okay, this is the one that should be designable if you name it correctly in the MMAT. And then the MMAT. So if you select the MMAT, basically what we're looking for here, it says table wood. That's good. That's the subset that we named as recolorable in the GMND. And then we have the object GID, that is the actual value of the GID in the OBJD, so the recolor should work. And to test that, one of the cool features of the MMAT, click this preview button. It basically does the same thing as the preview button in the GMDC. Sometimes it takes it a bit. Probably a little bit longer because this one has 14 different MMATs. There it is. So we can preview the actual table from all angles. We can see that our recolor works. So if we select a different MMAT and preview it, we can actually see a different recolor of the object. Yeah, see, that's a completely different color. And there we have it, object resources.